Chapter 15, Unraveling the Mystery. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of Grace's office as she sat at her desk, her thoughts swirling with a mix of emotions. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind: romantic evenings with Simon, unexpected revelations, and the reappearance of Michael, a man from her past who had stirred old feelings she thought she had buried long ago. But today, something felt different. There was an unspoken tension in the office, a subtle shift in the way people interacted with Simon. It wasn't just the usual curiosity, it was as if they were seeing him in a new light. Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. She had always prided herself on being in control, but now, she felt a growing sense of uncertainty. As much as she tried to focus on her work, her thoughts kept drifting back to Simon and the unspoken questions that lingered between them. The revelation begins. Later that day, Michael stopped by her office, a warm smile on his face as he leaned casually against the doorframe. "Grace, do you have a minute?" Grace looked up, grateful for the distraction. "Sure, Michael. What's on your mind?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I couldn't help but notice that Simon has been getting a lot of attention lately. There's something you should know." Grace's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Michael's expression softened as he took a seat across from her. "I've been doing some digging, and I realized why Simon seemed so familiar. The Hayes family, his family, is quite prominent in certain circles. My father did business with them years ago." Grace's mind raced. The pieces were slowly coming together, and the subtle hints Simon had dropped now made more sense. But the knowledge only deepened her sense of unease. "Michael, are you saying Simon is?" Grace couldn't finish the sentence, the words catching in her throat. Michael nodded. "Yes, Grace. Simon is part of a very influential family. The Hayes name carries a lot of weight in the business world. They've built an empire, and it's clear that Simon has been groomed to follow in those footsteps." Grace felt a mix of emotions: shock, disbelief, and a deepening sense of inadequacy. "Why wouldn't he tell me this?" "Maybe he didn't want you to see him differently," Michael suggested gently. "He probably wanted you to know him as Simon, not as the heir to a business empire." Grace nodded slowly, trying to process everything. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to build a life and a career from the ground up. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't deserve someone like Simon, someone whose background and status were so far removed from her own. Grace's inner struggle. As the day wore on, Grace found herself increasingly distracted. She had always been strong, but now she felt a vulnerability she hadn't expected. The idea that Simon was part of a world so different from hers made her question everything: her worth, her choices, and whether she was truly deserving of the love he was offering. By the time she returned home that evening, Grace was emotionally drained. She tried to focus on her daughters, but even their cheerful chatter couldn't pull her out of the storm of doubt swirling in her mind. After putting the girls to bed, Grace retreated to her bedroom, seeking solace in the quiet. She sat by the window, staring out into the night, her thoughts a tangled mess of conflicting emotions. How could she, a self-made woman who had struggled and fought for everything she had, be with someone like Simon? What could she possibly offer him that he didn't already have? Yet, as much as she doubted herself, there was also a small, persistent voice inside her that reminded her of the connection they shared. Simon had seen her strength, her vulnerabilities, and he still chose to be with her. Could she find the courage to accept that, to believe that she was enough? The next step. The next morning, Grace was determined to confront her feelings head-on. She knew she couldn't let this uncertainty fester. She needed to talk to Simon, to understand where they stood and whether there was a future for them, despite their differences. She found Simon in his office, engrossed in a conversation with one of his colleagues. As he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, his face lit up with a warm smile, but Grace could see the concern in his eyes as he noticed her serious expression. "Grace," Simon said, rising from his chair, "is everything okay?" She took a deep breath, nodding slightly. "We need to talk." Simon's smile faded as he gestured for her to come in. Of course. What's on your mind? Grace closed the door behind her, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. Simon, I've learned about your family, about who you really are. Simon's eyes widened slightly, but he remained calm. I see. I was planning to tell you, but I wanted to find the right time. Grace sighed, sitting down across from him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you keep it from me? Simon leaned forward, his voice filled with sincerity. I didn't want my background to change how you see me, Grace. I wanted you to know me for who I am, not for my family's wealth or influence. I was afraid it would create a barrier between us. Grace looked at him, her heart aching with a mix of love and uncertainty. But now that I know, I can't help but wonder if I'm enough, if I belong in your world. Simon's expression softened as he reached out, taking her hand in his. Grace, you've built your life with strength and resilience. You are more than enough. I don't care about the differences in our backgrounds. I care about you, the woman who has captivated me in every possible way. Grace felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Deeply. I want to believe that, Simon. But it's hard to reconcile who I am with who you are. Simon tightened his grip on her hand, his gaze never wavering. Grace, you're everything I've ever wanted. Your strength, your intelligence, your passion for life, they're what drew me to you in the first place. My family's wealth doesn't define me, and it certainly doesn't define what we have. Grace looked down at their joined hands, her mind still swirling with doubt but also with a growing sense of hope. I've always been the one in control, Simon. I've never allowed myself to rely on anyone, to be vulnerable. But with you, I'm afraid of losing that control. Simon gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. You don't have to do this alone, Grace. Let me in. Let me be there for you, not as some wealthy heir, but as a man who's deeply in love with you. Her breath hitched at his words, the truth of them sinking into her heart. The doubts she'd been harboring started to fade, replaced by the warmth of Simon's sincerity and the undeniable connection they shared. Simon, Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I want to believe in us, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what the world will say, of what this will mean for us. Then let's take it one step at a time, Simon replied softly, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We just have to be honest with each other, to face this together. Grace nodded, a small, tentative smile forming on her lips. Together. Simon smiled back, relief flooding through him. Together. The days that follow. In the days that followed, Grace and Simon began to navigate their relationship with a renewed sense of purpose. Simon continued to show his dedication, both in the office and in their personal lives. He made it clear that his feelings for Grace were genuine, unaffected by the differences in their backgrounds. Michael, who had known the Hayes family for years, kept a close but supportive eye on the situation. He respected Grace's need to take things slowly and offered his friendship without any ulterior motives. He was there to provide a listening ear and advice whenever Grace needed it, but he also recognized the deep bond between her and Simon. Meanwhile, Simon's identity as a Hayes slowly began to surface within the office. It started with subtle mentions in business circles, an occasional slip in conversation, and the curious glances from colleagues who had begun to piece together the puzzle. Simon didn't go out of his way to hide it anymore, but he didn't flaunt it either. He simply continued to work hard, earning respect for his skills and dedication rather than his family name. Grace found herself growing stronger with each passing day. The more time she spent with Simon, the more she realized that their connection went beyond social status and wealth. They shared a deep respect for each other's strengths and weaknesses, and that mutual understanding became the foundation of their relationship. But despite the progress they were making, Grace couldn't shake the lingering doubts completely. She worried about what would happen when Simon's family inevitably came into the picture, when the world would finally see them as a couple. Would she be enough for him then? Would she be able to hold her own in a world so vastly different from her own? the upcoming event. As they continued to build their relationship, an invitation arrived that would test Grace's resolve. It was an invitation to a prestigious charity gala, hosted by none other than the Hayes family. The event was set to take place in just a few weeks, and it was clear that Simon wanted Grace to accompany him. The invitation was a turning point. It would be the first time Grace would step into Simon's world, the first time she would face the reality of who he was and where he came from. "Grace, I want you to come with me," Simon said one evening as they sat together in her living room, the invitation in hand. "I know this is a big step, but I want to introduce you to my world on my terms. We'll do it together, and I'll be right by your side." Grace looked at the invitation, her heart pounding. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. It was an opportunity to finally face her fears head-on, to see if she truly belonged in Simon's life. But more than that, it was a chance to prove to herself that she was strong enough, worthy enough, to stand by Simon's side, no matter what the world might say. Taking a deep breath, Grace met Simon's gaze, her resolve hardening. "I'll go with you, Simon. We'll face this together." Simon's eyes lit up with pride and affection as he pulled her into his arms. "You have no idea how much that means to me, Grace." As they embraced, Grace felt a mixture of fear and determination. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Simon by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would step into the spotlight, ready to face the world as. Click follow for the next chapters.